Welcome to the fourth lecture in Module 4. And in this lecture, we'll talk about strings, regular expressions, and symbols in the Ruby programming language. First, let's start with strings. Now, there are two different ways to create strings in Ruby, either using single quotes or double quotes. And they're basically the same, except for one situation that you'll use quite a bit in your Rails applications. If you create a double quoted string and put a pound symbol followed by an open curly brace and a closed curly brace, anything inside those curly braces is interpreted as Ruby code, is executed, and then the resulting string is inserted into the string as a whole. Here's an example. If you type 360 degrees within double quotes equal, and then perform what's known here as string interpolation, again, that's the pound symbol followed by an open curly brace, it'll actually compute 2 times, and then it'll pull the constant pi from the math module and insert the computation of 2 times pi into this string. And you see the result below. If you enclose a string in single back quotes, then that string is given to the underlying operating system and executed there. So make sure you're using backticks on this. On my keyboard, that's in the upper left-hand corner. These are backticks, not the forward ticks. Here, I use backticks. I enclose the string date, and it actually gives that to the underlying operating system, and the date of today's date is returned. Now, unlike C++, strings in Ruby are mutable, but this is not like Java. So you have to understand that each time Ruby encounters a new string literal, it actually creates that. So you have to be careful if you're creating strings inside of loops. Every iteration of the loop is going to create a new string. So there are a number of methods associated with strings. So the string class is a very powerful class in Ruby. There's a lot of methods associated with it. Here's an example. From the IRB prompt, type name equal, and here I use Homer Blimson. And you'll notice that the return is, the string itself is returned on the next line. And I'm showing that as a comment in what I'm showing you here. Now we can inspect this string doing all sorts of things. Here, the length of the string is determined by invoking on the string that we've created the method length. And it says that this is a length 14 string. If you go to the 6th position, it'll return a B. And so here you can index into that string. And notice that this is zero-based indexing, zero-based arrays. So this is actually the 6th position is actually, you count 0. It's actually the 7th, right? So by indexing into the 6th position starting at 0, you'll end up at the 7th position of the string, which is a B. And you can actually get at substrings as well by doing name, in this case the string, and then 6.14 gets the portion of the string between the 7th and the 15th spot. And I can concatenate strings. Here, I'm going to create the string Bart, and then I'm going to add the locations 6 through 14 in the name string, and it's going to create Bart Blimson. Finally, if you'd like to look at the encoding of the string, how it's actually being encoded, type .encoding. There's a method that will return the encoding that's being used. And here it's saying by default, it's using the UTF-8 format. That's a Unicode format that's very prevalent in the World Wide Web. It's the most popular Unicode encoding format. Now, Ruby also has a regular expression class, and it's called regex. And it's very closely, regular expressions are very closely related to strings. So a regular expression provides a concise and flexible means of matching strings of text, in other words, particular characters or words, against patterns. And this is very powerful in web applications when you're using forms. If you'd like to check a form to make sure that something was entered correctly, an email address or a phone number, regular expressions are used for that. You've seen a little bit of this already when we've covered validations. But here's how a regular expression works in Ruby. There's a forward slash, and so with the forward slash, the pattern you'd like to match, and then another forward slash, and then any modifiers that you might like to include. So the pattern is the regular expression here, and the modifiers are just a series of characters that have various options. I'll give you some examples in just a moment. So this syntax, by the way, is used in almost every programming language nowadays that supports regular expressions, and it was borrowed from Perl. So in order to test if a particular regular expression matches a part of a string, you use this equal tilde operator. That's how you check if a string matches a regular expression. And what this operator does is it returns the position in the string of the start of any matches that it finds. And it returns a nil value if there are no match. So here's an example. If I, again, do this from the IRB prompt, type in double quotes Homer, and then the equal tilde /ER, it'll tell you this match is in position 3 in the string, which is the 4th position in the string. It found an ER and returned that match. So this is how you use that operator to match a regular expression to a string. Now, there's a lot to regular expressions, and I can't go over all of them in all of the various meanings of the symbols that you can use in regular expression. But here's a quick table that shows some of them. And so here, if you use the square brackets, that gives you a range. So here I could, for example, if I enclose lowercase a dash z, that means any letter between a and z. So that's how you specify a range. The backslash lowercase w indicates match against a word character, in other words 0 through 9, uppercase a through z, or lowercase a through z. And then the capitalized form always is the opposite. Backslash w means match a non-word character. And so you see S is for space and non-space character, D for digit and non-digit character, B for backspace or word boundary, and then again capital B for non-word boundary. Then there's some wildcard characters. Star means 0 or more repetitions of whatever precedes it. Plus means 1 or more. And then MN, you can indicate an exact number of repetitions, from 3 to 5 or something like that. And then question mark means at most 1 repetition. And there's a pipe symbol that indicates either preceding or the next expression may match. So these are just, again, a short list. You need to look at the Ruby documentation to really understand how to use regular expressions. If you come from another programming language that has regular expressions, then these will be familiar to you. Let's look at some examples. So, as I said, again, this is just a partial list. Look at a Ruby reference to get more. But here's a common example of how you might want to use regular expressions in a Rails application. Here I'm assuming that phone is a string. And this gsub is a method that you can apply to strings. And because I'm using the exclamation or bang version of gsub, it means it's going to change the string that I apply it to. All right? And so what gsub does is it takes the first argument, it matches it against the string, the phone number in this case, and it replaces it with the second argument. And what I've supplied as the second argument is an empty string. It's just a double quote followed by another double quote with nothing in between. So what happens to this? It'll take a phone number. Remember from the previous table that the capital D means a non-digit character. So if a phone number if somebody supplies a phone number as a part of a web form and it has anything other than a number in it, this will remove it and return just the numbers in the phone number. So this is a way to clean up a phone number that might be supplied on a web form to you. Clean it up before you perhaps store it in a database. So, as I've just shown you, regular expressions are commonly used to evaluate emails, phone numbers, other user-supplied input on a form in a Rails application. Here's a more extensive example, and this regular expression can be used to validate email addresses. And you'll see that there's a / and then a bunch of the symbols, some of which, many of them appeared on the previous table, some didn't. So look this up. As an exercise, look this up on in a Ruby reference and find out what each of these various symbols does in the regular expression checking. And what I'll do now is I'll show you what happens if you try to compare this to particular user input that may or may not correspond to email addresses. Let's take a look.
Let me show you how easy it is to extend an existing class. From the command line, let's open up the Ruby Interactive Console. And if I type a fixed num object 32 and type previous, we'll see that it yields an error. So let's define the previous function. I'm going to open up the class fixNum by just typing class fixNum. And when I hit return, you'll see that it shows a 1 here, indicating that I'm actually defining, I'm inside the definition of this class. And I want to define a new method. So def previous, and the method is going to be called previous. And when I hit return here, it shows me 2, that I'm inside the previous method now. And all I need to do inside this method is return self minus 1, as I showed you on the previous slide. Now, self minus 1 takes the current object of the class fixnum. So you've defined an object that's of type fixnum, and for that particular class, when you apply it to an object, it's going to subtract 1 from it and return the result. We know that I don't even need this return statement in Rails, so I can simply type self minus 1, and that would do the trick. I need to type end to end this method definition, and then end again to end the class definition. And this returns nil just because everything in Ruby returns some result. So this is the end of the class definition, return the nil result. And now if I type 32.previous, it will return the previous value, which is 31.
Now, symbols in Ruby are closely related to strings. Remember we said that strings are mutable in Ruby, and Ruby symbols are non-mutable. So what happens is that a Ruby interpreter maintains a symbol table where it stores the names of all classes, methods, and variables. And you can add your own symbols to this table. So here's how you do it. And you've already seen this. In fact, you've already seen this when we discussed attribute accessible reader and writer. So the colon row and colon column in here, this colon ROW, colon COL, these are symbols in Ruby. So Ruby symbols are used to represent names and strings, but unlike string objects, as I've already mentioned, the same name can be initialized and exist in memory only once for a Ruby symbol, but many times for a Ruby string. Thus, you can't do things like this. As I've said, Ruby symbols are immutable, so you can't create a symbol, say from the IRB command prompt, and assign a string to it. Try this, you'll get an error. So why do we have symbols? Well, there's a big space advantage to using symbols because, again, they only exist once in memory. You can't create multiple symbols with the same name. If you go to IRB and try this, just try puts and then the symbol name and then its object ID, it'll print a number. And in my case, it printed 20488. If you do this again on the next line, it's going to print the same number. It's the same object is what this is telling you. Now try this for a string instead. Put in double quotes name dot object ID, and it gives you a number here. This is the ID of that object. If you do that again on the very next line, it'll give you a different number. So you'll notice in the comment that I've shown you here, I have 2 different numbers. What this shows you is only one symbol called name can exist, but multiple strings called name can exist in Ruby. So when should you use a string versus a symbol? Well, here's a couple of rules of thumb. If the content of the characters really matters, in other words, that the object is important and you need to be able to manipulate it. For example, it's storing somebody's name and you'd like to be able to change that person's name. They'd like to shorten it or something like that. In other words, you want to be able to manipulate that string, then it should be used as a string. For a symbol, on the other hand, it's the identity of the object, the notion that you're trying to capture, right? And in this case, you're not interested in manipulating the string. In this case, use it as a symbol. I showed you an example of this previously. The attribute reader, let's say that was a matrix class and you wanted to store the row and column, that's not something that you want to change, the actual string itself. The row and the column are concepts that mean something in the array. And so in this case, it's better to use a symbol. We'll see that when we talk about hashes later in this module, that it's very common to use symbols with hashes as well. This completes the 4th lecture in Module 4.